So welcome everyone to this pHix-up webinar. I'm very happy to be with you to talk about magnesium, to talk about acidosis, and of course to talk also about our specialty product pHix-up. So I am Mélody Baudon, ruminant product manager at DCAD Magnesium, based in France. And I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Alex Bach, who is our guest speaker today. So Alex is a dairy production researcher in Spain, and he works at the Catalan Institute Research and Advanced Studies. So yeah, welcome, Alex. So I will start with this webinar by presenting you quickly DCAD Magnesium, which is a subsidiary of the Roulier Group. And then I will talk quickly about the interest of magnesium in animal nutrition before talking a little bit about acidosis and how it can be prevented, leading to then present pHix-up, which is a strong neutralizing agent that acts on rumen pH. And then Alex will be presenting interesting elements also about nutrition, going more in details on the acidosis topic and how it can be prevented. And then he will present you the results of the last study that we've done that was conducted in 2021. And the objective of this study was to compare the efficacy of on rumen pH of pHix-up at 65 grams per co per day, compared with sodium bicarbonate at 200 grams per co per day. So that dosage of sodium bicarbonate being 3 times more in terms of quantity compared to pHix-up. And he will focus also on rumen pH, DCAD, which is an important topic, and microbiome, to show you the full potential of pHix-up. So before we start, just to remind you, you have the possibility to ask questions. So you have on the top of your screen, normally you have some Q&A section. So do not hesitate to open it. And if you have any question, you can write it down in the chat. So yeah, do not hesitate if you have any question. I will try to look regularly at your question to answer it. Like, for example, if you have a specific question on a slide, do not hesitate. So first, starting with the group Roulier. So on this slide, you have all the subsidiaries of the group. So Group Roulier was born in 1959 in Saint-Malo, so in France, in Brittany, so the west part of France. And it's a family-owned company that started its business in the amendment products, so for acid soils. And these products were based on calcareous algae, so marine limestone. And then the group gets bigger and bigger. So today the group it's close to 10,000 employees worldwide, with 123 marketing countries. So it's really a big group. So I will not detail you every subsidiary, but you can see that it's very various topic. And so today we are talking about DCAD Magnesium. So it's we are really experts in magnesium. So, oops, sorry. To show you the map, worldwide, we are in every continent, and we have 2 mines, so one in Spain and one in Brazil, that we own. So that makes us so we are able to have a complete follow-up of our products from the mine to the clients. And we have 3 business units. So the first one is the industry, refractory, and agriculture with animal nutrition. So as an expert in magnesium, I wanted to start the presentation with some information about these elements. So the interest of magnesium in animal nutrition was discovered first in 1925, so quite late compared to other elements. It's a divalent cations that needs to be in its ion form, so Mg2+ form, to be absorbed by the animal. So, and it's also under this form that the product will be stable. So magnesium is included in ration into the form of, inorganic salts, for example. So you might know some of them, for example, magnesium chloride, magnesium sulfate, or magnesium oxide. But it can also be found in organic salt form, like, for example, magnesium citrate. And now you're wondering, okay, so it's good, but why magnesium is so important in animal nutrition? So magnesium actually is participating in more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the organism. So you have the most interesting ones listed on the slide. So, for example, I will not go into big details, but just to give you an idea, magnesium is a secondary element in the bone structure. But it has an essential role in the stimulation of bone growth and also bone structuration. So it is then important to have enough magnesium during the growth of the calf, for example. Magnesium has also an important role in the calcium regulation and absorption, so it is necessary to have enough magnesium in ration to increase the absorption from the intestine, the absorption of calcium. And that's why it's important to bring a calcium source during the dry-off period, so before calving. But you have also an essential role of the magnesium for the production of energy inside the cell, a role also in the lipid mechanism. So magnesium will stimulate the canals, allowing the precursor for milk fat synthesis in the mammary gland. And we have also an effect of magnesium, a positive effect on antioxidant activity. Better resistant to stress, also in the muscle relaxation. That's why it's also interesting to use magnesium, for example, against grass tetany. And all of this, the most important effect, and the one that is the most interesting for us today, is the effect on the ruminal pH. That I will develop just afterwards. So, staying on magnesium in ruminants, so magnesium is close to 0.05% of the body weight. So for a cow at 650 kg, it will be close to 325 grams. And this quantity is on the organism, you will find 65% in the bones, which is not, it can't be possible for the adult to mobilize it. So it's really important to bring magnesium directly from the diet. You can find also 35% in intracellular fluid and 1% in extracellular fluid, which is actually the blood. Now the different salts that you can find in animal nutrition. So here are presented only inorganic salts. On the graph, you have the main ones, and the scale is based on the magnesium oxide reagent grade. So, for example, magnesium chloride has a bioavailability of 90% compared to magnesium oxide reagent grade. So the idea of this slide is to show you the importance to look on one side at the bioavailability of a salt, and also on the magnesium content. So for example, magnesium chloride, if you have 100 grams of the product, you will have only 11 grams of magnesium solubilized, so quantity of magnesium available for the cow to be absorbed. And if you take 100 grams of magnesium oxide in powder form, you will have 43 grams of magnesium solubilized. So you can see the importance of having also a high content of magnesium to bring magnesium to the cow. Now, the problem with magnesium oxide is that there is a high variability between the different sources. So all of these parameters mentioned on the slide can have an effect on the reactivity and the solubility of the magnesium oxide. So the origin, if it's coming from a mine, from the sea, from synthetic process, the hydration level, the localization. You will have different impurities if the base product is coming from Spain or from China, for example. The heat treatment, so the calcination, and the particle size. So the finer the product is, the highest solubility you will have. So all of these parameters will impact the specific surface of the magnesium oxide and then its reactivity and its solubility. So now I just wanted to give you some information about acidosis, but Alex will go in more details about it, so I will be quite quick. So just to remind you, big information on the topic. So we consider today that 20% of dairy cows are experiencing subacute ruminal acidosis, so which is defined as a pH that drop below 5.8 for more than 3 hours per day. And as a consequence, you can have, of course, a reduced feed efficiency, drop in performances, an increased risk of other pathologies, so for example, lameness, and of course, linked to all of this, an increased cost for the farmer, which is estimated to be close to $1 per cow per day. And to fight against this pathology, you can use several feed additives today. So some will have a direct effect on the pH. So for example, sodium bicarbonate or pHix-up will have a direct effect on the pH, when other, like yeast, for example, will have an indirect effect on the pH. So acting first on the microorganism, and the microorganism having an effect on the pH. So regarding the different products that you can find in animal nutrition, so the buffer substances that you can find, the main one, the most known, of course, is sodium bicarbonate. So with sodium bicarbonate, the interest is the high solubility of the product, but its neutralizing capacity, so the capacity to neutralize the acid in the rumen is 12, so it's quite a low value. So you need to have a high quantity of product to have an effect. And with sodium bicarbonate, you will have a fast action because the solubility is important, but a short action in time. On the market, you can also find products like calcium carbonate, so for example, lithotanium, which is calcium carbonate from marine algae, and carbonate mix, so a mix of calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate, for example. So the neutralizing capacity are very close, around 20, so higher than sodium bicarbonate. But the problem with this product is that the pH, the solubility above a pH of 5.5 is quite low. So finally, when the product is inside the rumen, you will have a slow action, but long-lasting through time. You can find also sodium sesquicarbonate, which is very close to sodium bicarbonate, so almost the same neutralizing capacity and also a very high solubility. And you can find also magnesium oxide. So today, magnesium oxide is not really used as a buffer solution or an alkalinizer product. It's more used to bring MgO and in complementary of action with sodium bicarbonate, so, most of the time. So as I was saying before, the problem with magnesium oxide is that the variability is very different and very specific for each source. So yeah, that's why you need to know the parameters of the magnesium oxide to have an idea of its action on the rumen pH. So now you may wonder, like, how does it work? Finally, magnesium oxide in the rumen. So on the photo, you have a grain of magnesium oxide. And the first reaction when the magnesium oxide will enter the rumen, the first reaction will be the creation of magnesium hydroxide crystals at the surface of the grain. So that's the white crystals that you can see on the picture. And this white crystal will increase the surface of contact with the rumen juice. So the second step will be the solubilization of magnesium in the rumen. So you will have magnesium in its Mg2 plus form, so the available form for the animal to be absorbed. and you will have hydroxide ions. And these hydroxide ions will combine with protons to form water, and that's how you will neutralize the acid thanks to this hydroxide ion form. So again, the problem is the variability. So one simple magnesium oxide source is not enough to predict the effect you will have on the rumen pH. So the kinetic and the potency of the magnesium oxide source will depend on the origin, on the manufacturing process. So as I was saying, the calcination and the particle size and other parameters that we mentioned. So because of this high variability between the different magnesium oxide sources, there was a necessity to have a specific industrial process and also to choose wisely the best sources of magnesium oxide. And finally, that's how pHix-up was born. So coming back on the different buffer solutions that are used in animal nutrition. So here you can find the same that we mentioned before, but now I've added pHix-up as a comparison. So you can see that with pHix-up, the neutralizing capacity is 39. So 3 times higher than the neutralizing capacity of sodium bicarbonate. So we really base our pHix-up dosage on this ratio. Like 1 bag of pHix-up is equivalent to 3 bags of sodium bicarbonate. So if you are using, for example, 250 grams of sodium bicarbonate, you can use only 85 grams of pHix-up to expect to have the same effect on the pH. And so the previous test was the neutralizing capacity, and we have the chance in the Roulier group to have some labs with artificial rumen. And thanks to this, we are able to test our products in this rumen juice. So it's really rumen juice collected on cows, cannulated cows. And you can see that both carbonate source, solitotanium and carbonate mix, as it's a very low solubility, both products are not able to increase the pH above the threshold of acidosis, so the threshold of 5.8. Then we tested sodium bicarbonate at 250 grams per cup per day and pHix-up at 90 grams per cup per day, so close to 1/3. And you can see that the effect on the rumen pH is the same, so we don't have difference, even if the pHix-up dosage was 3 times lower. And the product with the highest action on the rumen pH, it's pHix-up at 125 grams per cup per day, so that's the maximum dosage we advise, with a fast action after 2 hours of fermentation and a long-lasting action during the time. And to show you the differences between the different magnesium oxides you can find on the market, here on the graph you have a correlation between the pH after 2 hours of fermentation, so it was also done in rumen juice, and the quantity of magnesium solubilites for 100 grams of products after 6 hours of fermentation. And you can see that if you compare MgO-A with MgO-F, with MgO-A, sorry, you are able to increase the pH from 5.8 to 6.3. When with MgO-F, you are able only to increase the pH from 5.8 to 5.95, close to this. And you can see also the correlation with the quantity of magnesium solubilized. So the more the products solubilize in the rumen, so with MgO-A, you have like 22 grams of magnesium solubilized for 100 grams of product, when with MgO-F, you have only 40 grams. So the most the product solubilized, the most effect you will have on the pH. And then next to all of this MgO source, you have pHix-up, all above the graph. So with pHix-up, you have a mix of high solubility. So you are able, with pHix-up, with 100 grams of pHix-up, you are solubilizing more than 30 grams of magnesium after 6 hours of fermentation. And linked to this, you have a strong action on rumen pH. So the product is able to increase the pH from 5.8 to 6.5 after 2 hours of fermentation. So as a conclusion, a little bit on this part. So finally, pHix-up, it's a 2-in-1 product. So on one side, so the idea was to have a specific blend of magnesium oxides that were specifically chosen for their complementary mode of action, so fast action and long-lasting action on the rumen pH. And also to have a highly soluble source of magnesium to meet the requirement of the cow. And what is important also to know with pHix-up is that you have a unique industrial experience and know-how. So with consistent characteristic and quality, it's a product with a natural origin obtained without chemical process, so you can use it in organic farming, and it's easy to use and to incorporate in the ration. So I will not go in also into details of all of the trials that we've done. If you want more information about one trial, if you are interested to have more information, do not hesitate to contact me. So on the slide, you have all the trials that we've done with the protocol. So we really followed the study measuring the rumen pH, sometime with boluses, and measuring the milk production. So yeah, if you want more information, do not hesitate. And we have also new trials ongoing, so in France, in Poland, Ireland, and recently finished trial in Ukraine and Canada. And Alex will talk about studies that we've done in Spain, so in the experimental station of Blanca. And we've done also a study in Brazil with Labras University, in an experimental station too, with Professor Marcos Neves. So just to explain you how to use pHix-up, finally. So as I was saying before, the main advice is to use pHix-up with the neutralizing capacity ratio. So as I was saying, if people are using 250 grams of sodium bicarbonate, you can use 85 to 90 grams of pHix-up to expect to have the same efficiency. But we also advise our dosage on the level of concentrate, starch, and NDF in the ration to have an idea of the acidosis risk of the ration, and to help people to have a better idea of the pHix-up dosage that will be adapted to their diets. We made an app so you can access it with the QR code. And in the app, you have all the steps to measure the adapted pHix-up dosage. So pHix-up can be used either in the mixed ration or the total ration. And the total maximum, what we advise to check is the total maximum magnesium dosage. So it has to be lower than 0.6% of the dry matter intake. The only risk is to have diarrhea, so it's not a big issue, but still it's not pleasant. If there is any issue with diarrhea, you just have to remove a little bit of pHix-up to come back to normal. And we advise also, if you are using lithotanium or if you are using sodium bicarbonate, to check if the level of calcium and sodium are still within the targeted range. And pHix-up can be used between 0.2 and 0.5% of the dry matter intake. So for a ration at 25 kg, it will be between 50 grams and 125 grams of pHix-up. So that's all on my side. Just checking if there is questions. Okay. No, so yeah, again, if you have any question, do not hesitate. So on the top of your screen, normally you have access to a Q&A section. So yeah, do not hesitate if you have any question. And I will let Alex talk about the results of our last study.
Thank you very much, Mélody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming to you all. I'm gonna share the screen. Okay, now we should see the screen. So in about 30 minutes, I will cover rumen physiology, focusing on pH modulation. When we talk about pH, we always think about rumen acidosis. It's an affliction that takes place in a big chunk of the cows, especially early lactation. Between 20% of early lactation cows have rumen acidosis, and also some studies have looked also at mid lactation, so animals above 80 days in milk or so, and you still can find about 26% of the animals with rumen acidosis. So what I'll do very briefly is to look at the causes of rumen acidosis, the symptoms, how can we identify if we have a problem, and some of the solutions that we can use to prevent and control this affliction. So the causes, very briefly, it's basically an imbalance between the forces that will increase rumen pH, that will be saliva, dietary buffers, and the fiber level of the diet on one side. And on the other side, we're going to have the rate of acid production, which will depend on the concentrate level, the rate of fermentation of that concentrate, and the type of acids that this fermentation produces. It is not the same if the fermentation produces lots of acetate, which is more acidic than propionate, therefore the pH in the rumen will go lower, than if we produce lots of butyrate, which is less acidic than acetate, for instance, or if we produce lactic acid, which of course is much more acidic. And that will depend on the ingredients that we use in the diet and the rate of fermentation and many other things. There is another factor, which is the rate of absorption, and that will depend on the integrity and the health of the rumen wall. And the last factor will be passage rate. So if we have animals that eat a lot, passage rate is relatively fast, and therefore the chances for these acids to be accumulated in the rumen and cause rumen acidosis decreases. It's a bit ironic, but the cows that eat the most, they have a little advantage, which is that the feed stays a bit shorter in the rumen, so they have a lower risk of acidosis on that sense. So when we think about acidosis, it always comes to mind fiber, right? This is our friend to fight acidosis. And there is a nice relationship between NDF or fiber in the diet and ruminal pH. However, that's not the cause of rumen acidosis. The real cause of rumen acidosis is the amount of non-fiber carbohydrates, which of course is negatively correlated with rumen pH. The more non-fiber carbohydrates I have in my diet, the lower fiber content I have in my diet. Okay, so the graph in the left is a consequence on the graph on the right. So if I'm concerned about rumen acidosis, what I really should be focusing on is on my non-fiber carbohydrate fraction. And when I say focusing, I say that we should look at amounts and not percentages. All right. This is a graph where you see non-fiber carbohydrates kilograms per day. And this is percentage of body weight, but it's just kilograms per day. And you have squares and circles. And you see that the majority of circles have a low rumen pH. And the squares have a high rumen pH, or relatively higher. If I were to tell you that beef, so the squares and the circles are beef or dairy, okay? Beef, we all know that they consume diets that are 60, 55% NFC, whereas cows consume diets that are 40, maybe 42, maximum 44% NFC. So they have a lower percentage of NFC. So by looking at this, if you were to guess, you probably would say, well, maybe the cows that have 44% or 42% NFC will have a greater rumen pH than the beef guys, because the beef guys have 60% NFC. It's opposite, okay? Because what matters is the kilos of NFC in the rumen. It's true that on paper, a beef diet has lots of NFC, but when you multiply the percentage by the pounds that the beef guys eat, at the end of the day, you end up only with 8 pounds of starch in the rumen. And that's not going to be sufficient to cause the same damage that you could cause with a cow consuming 60 pounds of, let's see, I'm thinking in pounds, I don't want to make, but yeah, I think it would be like 60 or 40 pounds of dry matter, which would be equivalent to 16 or 15 pounds of starch. So that's its amount and not percentage. Very important concept. So how are we going to know if we have acidosis? it's all going to start with the cow feeding and start to eat. And of course, that's going to cause a decrease in rumen pH. That decrease in rumen pH is going to lyse or kill some bacteria. The contents of these bacteria will be exposed in the rumen. That's going to increase the osmolality in the rumen. And there are sensors in the top or in the dorsal sac of the rumen that sense osmolality. Whenever osmolality goes above 300 or 320 milliosmoles, appetite decreases. So the cow will stop eating. And of course, after a while that the cow doesn't eat, pH goes up, osmolality decreases, the receptors stop preventing intake, so appetite resumes, the cow goes back to the feed bank, and there you go again with another cycle of rumen acidosis. That's very easy to see when we do experiments and we have tight cows in front of the feed. Very difficult to see under field conditions. So under field conditions is much better to look at the rear end of the cow. And you'll see cows that today they have a very watery and splashy manure. That's the consequence of a rumen acidosis cycle. Then it goes to normal feces when she starts eating. And then you have firm feces when the cow is not eating. So what you'll see in the field is cows that have in the same pen dirty tails with dry manure, dirty tails with fresh manure. And that's going to be an indication that something is not clicking well in the diet. Another really nice thing that I like to do when I go to herds and look for rumen acidosis is go to the slaughterhouse. Of course, it's a bit too late for the cow at hand, but it's very informative to find out what's going on in the herd. And what you will find out in many occasions is here you have two pictures of a very healthy rumen and a very healthy liver. But sometimes you will find something like that. That's rumen from a cow that had rumen acidosis. You can see a lot of parakeratosis, papilla are poorly irrigated, they are dark, they are damaged. And most important than the rumen, if you look at the liver of that cow, that's the way it looked, okay? So this rumen, it's permeable to bacteria and fungi, and these fungi and bacteria through the portal vein will reach the liver and they will produce abscesses. And make no mistake, milk production doesn't take place in the mammary gland, okay? All that mammary gland does is collect the nutrients that the liver provides it. And this liver, with this number of abscesses, is going to have a great difficulty providing amino acids and glucose to the mammary gland to produce protein and casein and lactose. So that's probably the reason why this cow ended up in the slaughterhouse, right? So it's a good way of learning what's going on in the herd. So another sign that may indicate that we have a rumen problem of acidosis is lameness. And that's because when rumen pH changes, there are some bacteria that will grow in the rumen, and this bacteria will secrete inflammatory substances. They will also damage the rumen wall, and that's by itself is going to cause inflammation. And these inflammation signals will also end up causing lameness to the animal, okay? Especially in the front legs, which support the heaviest part of the animal in terms of body weight. Another sign, and I'd just like to spend 2 or 3 minutes on this, is rumination, because we have the perception that animals that have rumen acidosis, they don't ruminate. And that is a fact, okay? It's not a perception, it's a reality. The problem is that now in the field we have sensors and we have people looking at rumination time. And I'm just going to show you a couple of studies from Canada. And what these studies show is if you look at rumination time, minutes per day, it's negatively, okay, correlated with rumen pH. This means the more minutes the cows ruminate, the lower the rumen pH, so the more acidosis. That's one study. It could be a glitch. Let's look at another study, also from Canada. This is the amount of hours a day that the pH in the rumen is below 5.8. And here is rumination time. The cows with high rumination times, above 400 minutes, they spend a greater number of hours with a pH in the rumen below 5.8. So again, the more the cow ruminates, the more rumen acidosis we have. So the conclusion from this is maybe the cows in Canada are different from the rest of the world, but I doubt it. Okay, the real thing is that we need to express rumination time in a proper way. So just measuring time that cows ruminate is not going to help us. We need to express it in proportion to the dry matter that the animal consumes. And this study illustrates that very well. We have here eating time, but in the center we have rumination time. In a diet that goes from 40% forage in black to 70% forage in green, rumination time is the same. And you could say, well, maybe the cows with 40% forage, they're likely to be in acidosis, and they rarely were so. 70% forage, they are not going to have acidosis. Hey, they ruminate the same. You need to express this data minutes of rumination per kilos or pounds of dry matter consumed. Then you're going to see a difference. Okay, so if you're going to use a rumination as a sign for rumen acidosis, you really need to combine it with intake. All right, otherwise you may draw the wrong conclusions. So yes, the cows that have rumen acidosis will ruminate less per kilo or pound of dry matter consumed. All right, so we've seen the causes, we've seen the signs more or less, and now how about prevention and control? I will just talk about two different strategies in terms of additives. One could be yeast, either alive or dead. And a little bit as what Mélody was saying, there is a great diversity in responses depending on the product that you use. So not all the yeast that are alive are equal, not all of them have the same action. Some of them are very good promoting fiber digestion, some of them, they do nothing, some of them, they're very good preventing rumen acidosis. So you need to ask, what's the strain, what is the data, what is the research for this strain, and every strain is a different commercial company behind. But you can see here that there are great differences. I'm more than double in terms of, for instance, fiber degradation or rumen pH action. So the topic of today, buffers and alkalinizers, sodium bicarbonate versus magnesium oxide. They're not the same. People talk about buffers, but they are not buffers, okay? Sodium bicarbonate, it is a buffer, and magnesium oxide is an alkalinizer. What is the main difference? Buffers are substances that once they're added to a solution, the amount of acid that the rumen will need to secrete to change the pH, it's going to be a little bit greater. So they're going to need to produce more acid for that pH to change. Whereas alkalinizer, what they do is that the moment that they reach the rumen, immediately the pH goes up. It's not going to stay up for a longer time, okay? So you need to provide magnesium oxide almost in a continuous basis because it doesn't last a lot. Once it does the action, so pH goes up, then magnesium hydroxide in that case goes away, and then pH just starts going down again, okay? Whereas the sodium bicarbonate will have a more sustained action. Now, if you look at the research in this topic, it's quite old, okay? There were a lot of studies in the 80s involving sodium bicarbonate and magnesium oxide or combination of them. And most of the studies were using 1% of sodium bicarbonate in the diet. So that's about 500, so no, it's 250 grams. So that would be a pound, more or less, no, not a pound. Boy, that would be half a pound of sodium bicarbonate per day. So it's quite a bit, okay? When you look at the results, and this is interesting, in that time, so in 1982, they were already testing sodium bicarbonate alone, 1% of the diet, magnesium oxide alone, or in combination with sodium bicarbonate. And if you look at meal production, the one that resulted in the greatest results was magnesium alone. And sodium bicarbonate or sodium bicarbonate plus magnesium, they actually had pretty much the same action, okay? So they actually concluded that most of the actions were coming from magnesium oxide. However, somehow, if you look in the literature and you go to the field, most of the diets have sodium bicarbonate and just a little bit of magnesium oxide as a source of magnesium, not as an additive to control rumen pH. The problem with using sodium bicarbonate, the consequence, okay, is that it's expensive. If you need to add 1% of sodium bicarbonate in your diet, and your cows are eating 27 kilos of dry matter, you're going to have to add about 270 grams of sodium bicarbonate. That will cost you around 10 cents per cow a day. But the problem is that this is a lot of space in the diet. And we're always short when we formulate dairy cow rations on space. We need space to put amino acids, we need space to put energy. So that space could be better used instead of using stones or minerals if we put amino acids. So the problem is that now that I have added 270 grams in my diet, and that the direct cost is 10 cents, now I have to increase the energy density and the protein density of my diet, and the total cost of the diet goes up 25 cents per cow and day. Direct cost is 10 cents. The remaining 15 cents is a consequence of increasing the energy content and the protein content of the diet. All right. So in other words, I have to put more corn or more soybean meal and reduce a little bit forage to make space to put sodium bicarbonate. So that's something to keep in mind. Using magnesium oxide instead, as Mélody was saying, you're going to have 1/3. Because you instead of using 270, you will be using close to 70 grams. So you have more space and the diet will be cheaper. So what's going to happen if you do that? Well, this is an in vitro study where they use sodium bicarbonate, magnesium hydroxide or control, and they were adding, they had their fermentation running, and they were looking at rumen pH. And you can see the rumen pH goes down from 7 to 4 with sodium bicarbonate. It goes down from 7 to a little bit below 4 with nothing. And it goes down from 7 to 6 with magnesium hydroxide. So it looks like this is way better than this in terms of controlling rumen pH. Is magnesium oxide the magic? No, really is as Mélody was saying, what matters is magnesium hydroxide. At the moment that magnesium oxide reaches the rumen and gets in contact with water, if it is soluble, it will be converting to magnesium hydroxide and it will act as an alkalinizer. The same thing that happened with yeast, it happens with magnesium oxide sources. They are not all created equal, they're not the same. There's a nice study from Jesse where they actually compare the viability of different magnesium oxide sources. And that was ranked 200, and this goes to 10%. So you may be thinking, oh, I'm adding 70 grams of magnesium oxide in my diet, my rumen is safe because it's very soluble. Well, guess what? You're only adding 7 grams because it's 10% of 70. So you really have to check what source of magnesium oxide you're using. One thing that people raise or are concerned is, well, if I remove sodium bicarbonate, which is a great source of sodium, and I put magnesium oxide, my DCAD, so my balance between anions and cations in the diet, will decrease. And there are some meta-analyses that show that, hey, if DCAD goes down, dry matter intake goes down quadratically, and milk yield was also to go down, okay? And that's the case, but that's the case because we're going in a range between -100 and 1,000 almost, okay? But if we focus on the change that we're gonna achieve by removing sodium bicarbonate and just adding 70 grams or 50 grams of magnesium oxide, we're in this range. So I'm gonna blow this up. And you see this curvilinear relationship. If we were to ignore whatever is on the left on this red line, there is basically no change in dry matter intake when DCAD fluctuates between 20 or 200 and 60 or 600, okay? So I'm not afraid if I remove my sodium bicarbonate and I go down from 40 to 35, my intake is not gonna be affected, all right? So that brings me to the study that Mélody was mentioning that we just ran about a couple of years ago, almost published this year. And we basically were doing that. Well, the question was, okay, what if we remove sodium bicarbonate and we replace it by 1/3 of the quantity using magnesium oxide in the form of pHix-up? So these are the diets that we used. And on top of that, we were using a rumen acidosis challenge. So every 7 days, we were removing some fescue hay from the diet and adding some barley. Okay, so we were reducing the forage to concentrate diet, the forage to concentrate ratio from 47% forage at the beginning to 36% forage at the end. All right, and the remaining was concentrate. In terms of DCAD, well, NDF, of course, was going down from 32 to 28%, and NFC, which is the real cause of acidosis, it increased from 42 to 47. If we look at DCAD, of course, there were also changes. The control diet that had no sodium bicarbonate or no pHix-up, it had a DCAD of about 19, and it remained 19. It went down to 14 with a high concentrate forage to concentrate ratio. With sodium bicarbonate, of course, very high DCAD, 30, and with a low forage concentrated diet, it was 23. And then with magnesium oxide, it was a little bit intermediate, but very close to the control. Okay, so again, very low DCAD, not very low, but much lower than sodium bicarbonate. Now, important in this study, and that was one of the conclusions that we also draw, is that there are two ways of calculating DCAD. One is just the regular equation that considers sodium and potassium as positive, and chlorine and sulfur as negative. There is an extended version of this equation which considers other anions and other cations. So you can actually look at sodium, potassium, but also calcium and magnesium, which we're adding with pHix-up. And then we can also look at chlorine and sulfur plus phosphorus. Okay, so this equation, because it's a bit more complicated, not many people use it. But in this study, we found that if you use this equation, is much more precise and indicative of what's going on in terms of intake and meal production and cation anion balance. Okay, so this is what happened. All right, so this is the 4 periods that we had, where we were progressively increasing the concentrate and removing forage. Driving our intake, what you would expect normally is that as you remove forage and you provide more concentrate, intake will go up, okay? But it did not, okay? It was going down because of rumen acidosis, okay? Except if you look at the gray bars, which is the cows with pHix-up, when they were on extreme situations, intake actually was starting to go up, okay? These guys had a little bit better rumen conditions. They had less fiber in the diet, so they were able to eat a little bit more, okay? And you'll see that later on, that's because of the rumen pH. But it's interesting to see that that response, it's very indicative of rumen health, right? That's exactly what you would expect. If you remove forage, cows should be able to eat more. Why they don't do it here? Because the rumen conditions are not appropriate, and they have less fiber, but they cannot digest that fiber, and so they cannot eat more. And that's rumen pH. Blue is the control, green is the sodium bicarbonate, and the gray is pHix-up. And you can see that again, as the rumen acidosis challenge worked, the more concentrate that we added to the diet, the lower the pH. But the decay in rumen pH was much lower with magnesium oxide or pHix-up. And if you look at the proportion or the time of the number of hours that the animals were with a rumen pH below 5.8, which at the end of the day, that's what really matters, it almost didn't change as we increase concentrate level in the diet. It was 22 and it was 21 here. Whereas in the other cases, it went from 20 to 40, so it doubled, okay? So it's that's really important. That's what changes the microbiome in the rumen and allows the animal to eat more. You can have a punctual decrease in rumen pH and you'll see the dynamics, but at the end, what counts is how many hours a day you have been with a low rumen pH. This is exactly the dynamics of rumen. So we were measuring rumen pH with boluses, and the red lines are the moments of the day that we were feeding the cows. And you can see that before feeding, rumen pH, which is the line on top, it was low at the end of the day, and then during the night it was going up until the moment of eating. And the gray bars, in this case, this is sodium bicarbonate. It was higher right after eating in the morning. Okay, the reason why it was higher is because these guys had less feed in the rumen. They were eating less, so the rumens had. Remember the graph I showed before, that what matters is the kilos of starch that you have in the rumen. So these guys have low amounts of feed. That's why they have greater pH. Now they start eating, feed gets into the rumen, and now pH with the sodium bicarbonate starts going down, and it goes actually much lower than in control. Why? Because they're also eating more than the control. So sodium bicarbonate has a positive effect on intake, respective to the control, but intake goes down. But pH, goes below the control because they eat more. And what's interesting is the magnesium or the pHix-up cows, they were able to maintain a much higher pH with a greater intake. Okay, so that's the beauty of it. So it's way more effective, and you save a space in the diet, so you have a less expensive diet. The other consequence that we observed, we did total tract digestibility. So we measure the intake and we collected feces, and as expected, as the cows had less forage in the diet and more concentrate, because of rumen acidosis, digestion went down of fiber. We know that rumen pH, if it goes down, cellulosic bacteria die. And it went down in all treatments, except again, pHix-up cows. It also went down, but with a very high concentrate diet and very acidotic conditions, they were able to digest fiber almost double, from 22 to 36, and they have digestibility. So that provides more nutrients, more energy to produce milk. Why did that happen? We actually look at microbiome. So we took rumen samples and we look at the rumen microbiome population. And we saw interesting things. On the left, we see the direct effect of the neutralizing agent. And on the right, we see the effects of changing forage to concentrate diets. The most interesting thing is Bacteroidetes, which is a phylum that is associated with poor efficiency of conversion or utilization of feed. It was greater in the cows that had no additive or the cows that had sodium bicarbonate, and they were lower with pHix-up. So there are plenty of studies that look at the ratio between Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes, and if this ratio increases, efficiency goes down. So these cows, they should be less efficient. The other thing that we saw is that the cows with pHix-up had a greater relative abundance of fibrobacteria. Fibrobacteria, of course, includes cellulosic bacteria. The guy is responsible for degrading fiber. That's the reason why they had a greater fiber digestibility. That's the reason why they were able to eat more feed, even though the other cows didn't. When we reduced forage, they were able to express or actually eat more diets because they were digesting the little fiber they were consuming. The cows in control and soybean and sodium bicarbonate, because they could not digest the fiber, despite the fact that the forage intake decreased, that forage was not digested in the rumen, so they could not continue to eat. Okay, that's the beauty. No differences in Firmicutes and no difference in protobacteria. In terms of the effect of forage to concentrate diet or the effect of acidosis, direct effect of acidosis, as expected, cellulosic bacteria go down as acidosis increases. Protobacteria go up. Protobacteria is a phylum of bacteria that has been closely associated with acetic acid production and lactic acid production, and they are predominant in acidosis conditions. Here you can see that with pHix-up, it's a bit lower, but it's not significant. But you can see that there is also a little change there. And that's all I wanted to share with you. I was a little bit fast, but I only had 30 minutes, and I think I made it. So if you have any questions, I think we still have a few minutes for questions and comments. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alex. It was perfect. Perfect timing.
I was rushing a little bit.
So we have a question in the chat from Dr. Khaled Said. He was curious about how many times of feeding per day there was during the trial.
Right. The cows were fed twice a day. So they were fed at 7 a.m. in the morning and at 3 p.m. and 3 in the afternoon. So twice a day.
Thank you. So everyone, if you have any questions, so yeah, there is a question from Olga. Let me see. What was the level of magnesium and sodium what is the level of magnesium and sodium that should be provided in the diet? So for example, for Holstein, 30 to 35 liters of milk production with a dry matter intake between 23 and 24 kg.
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. The first thing that I would do is how many grams of sodium bicarbonate are these cows eating today? If they're eating less than 1%, so in that case would be less than 240 grams, I would not hesitate a second in removing sodium bicarbonate. Because all the data in the literature says that if you feed less than 1% sodium bicarbonate, the effects of that in the rumen are almost negligible. So if you're feeding 100 grams or 120 sodium bicarbonate, just take it out. And what I would add is 60-65% grams of magnesium oxide in the form of pHix-up. That will increase the rumen pH if you're concerned about it, and it's not going to take a lot of space in the diet. So the answer would be 0 grams of sodium bicarbonate and 65 grams of pHix-up. Don't be afraid of removing sodium bicarbonate. I just review an article for a journal. I cannot say much more than that. It will be in press relatively soon, where they actually did that. They removed sodium bicarbonate. They didn't add anything, and the consequences were really, really minor or almost nothing. So.
Thank you, Alex. So yeah, everyone, if you have any question, yeah, so thank you, Olga. So when replacing buffer and or sodium bicarbonate with pHix-up, according to the value of neutralizing capacity, the level of production dropped. What indicators of macro elements in the diet should be checked?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I will give you an answer, and if that is not what you expected, just ask again. I would always make sure that the diet provides, in terms of micronutrients, I think you refer to microminerals and also NDF and all this. So NDF, NDF, it depends on what you're feeding, but ADF, I would ensure that you still at least provide 90% ADF. NFC, don't go above 44%. Calcium, I'd like to be between 0.8 and 1%. Magnesium around 0.35%, and potassium around 1%. Fat below 5%. And protein between, it depends but on the intake and everything, but I will go between 15.5 to maximum 16.5. I don't know if that was the question. If not, I apologize and ask again. I don't know.
Thank you, Alex. A question on my side regarding the DCAD. What would be your advice to check if the DCAD is at a correct level on farm? So I heard about the measuring urine pH, because there is a correlation between urine pH and DCAD. So what are your thoughts on this?
Right. There is a nice correlation, very, very nice correlation between urine pH and DCAD. So you can actually go and check urine in a few cows. It's a bit tedious to do. You have to stimulate the vagina and then you can collect a sample. But the relation is great. I mean, if you have a 20 DCAD, your urine pH will be between 7.8 and 8. And if you have a 40 DCAD, your urine pH will be 8.2, 8.3. It's really, really precise. So it's a very good way of measuring DCAD. And remember, if you measure DCAD with the extended equation, you can feed a ration with a DCAD around 30 and nothing will happen. The intake will be, as I showed in the study that we did, still remains the same or even better than with sodium bicarbonate.
Thank you. So Dr. Khaled Said has a new question. He's saying that farmers in his part of the world used to feed dairy cows with very challenging rations, close to 70% of concentrates. So what would be your recommendations regarding this? Yeah,
these diets, and I've seen many places, they use that diet, and sometimes we use it as well. When we use this type of diet, first thing, passage rate is super high, right? Because there is not a lot of structure. So you need to add a forage that is really rough. So, and that means a straw or a very rough hay. And that diet should have 2 kilos, around 2 kilos of straw or something similar, just to give some structure to the rumen and slow down passage rate. Of course, you're gonna need pHix-up. I'm gonna use there 70 or 80 grams of pHix-up to these cows. And then I will look at the concentrate sources. So what is my concentrate? I would stay away from wheat and barley, and I would majorly use corn or sorghum, which ferment more slowly and prevent these sudden increases of acids in the rumen. So that's basically what I would do.
Thank you, Alex. Is there any other questions? Do not hesitate. Okay, so we have a question from Dima. Hey Alex, with DCAD levels throughout the USA being all over the place, I believe nutritionists are overestimating the actual recommendation of DCAD levels. Do you believe that the levels are getting increasingly too high, or does it depend primarily on what they have available to feed in the respective regions?
Right. When you look at DCAD levels in the field, of course, there is a big fraction of them that depends on the forage that you have, right? If you're very aggressive with fertilization, you will have grasses with lots of potassium and your DCAD will be high. But then there is also a will of the nutritionist to increase a little bit farther that DCAD. I see no reason to increase DCAD above 30. I mean, I really don't see any reason to do that. If I get above 30 because my forages are very high in potassium, so be it. But I will not do anything from my side to go above 30 DCAD.
Thank you. Any other questions? Do not hesitate. And in any case, if you have questions after the webinar, you can, so I put my email address in the chat, so do not hesitate to contact me. Yeah, if you have any question, if you want any more information about what we presented today, do not hesitate to contact me. So I guess we're good with the questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this webinar. Thank you, Alex, for your very nice presentation.
Thank you for the invite and thank you for listening, guys. I apologize if I was a bit too fast. I was rushing for the time.
Perfect. So yeah, thank you, everyone. For those in Europe, I wish you a good evening, and for the other in the US or in the America continent, have a good day. And again, thank you for attending this webinar.
Bye, guys. Bye, Mélody.
Bye.